If you're new to wildlife photography and feeling kind of uncertain about the equipment, the settings, and how to approach and find animals, this video will guide you through all of the essentials to begin confidently. My name is Louis and I'm a wildlife photographer based here in Montreal, Canada. My primary focus is on birds as they are the most common species in this region, and I approach photography and videography with an ethical mindset, and I'm eager to share the foundational knowledge I wish I had when I began my own journey. Today I'll be going over how to choose your gear without taking out a new mortgage, the 3 core settings on cameras and how they interact, how to use autofocus, simple composition tricks, and most importantly, the ethics so we're not stressing or endangering wildlife. Okay, so in terms of gear, it's so easy to go into a camera store and spend upwards of $20,000 for good wildlife gear. But the truth is, it's not necessarily what's best for you, and there's tons of less expensive options out there. With bird and wildlife photography, I see mainly 2 types of cameras. The first, which I see more often for people who enjoy bird watching and want to take some casual photos of what they see, we have the super zoom cameras with fixed lenses like the Nikon Coolpix P1100, which can offer very wide angle views and go up all the way to 3000 millimeters. This is a less expensive tool that will offer you great range and incredible portability because it's just about 1 kilogram and is very, very small. On the other end, you have the mirrorless cameras, which is what you typically see when you come across wildlife photographers. Unlike their parent, the DSLR, the mirrorless cameras don't have that big heavy glass piece inside, so they're now lighter and smaller than the DSLRs used to be. So let's go over a few key differences between the mirrorless and the super zoom, starting with reach and image quality. The super zoom, as the name implies, will be able to zoom much further than what you'll typically see on a mirrorless camera and at a fraction of the price. With the Nikon that I mentioned earlier, the P1100, we can go up to 3000 millimeters with a piece of equipment that is just north of $1,000. On mirrorless cameras, well, we don't see that kind of distance too often, if at all, and it would be quite expensive. This all comes with a caveat though. Typically, you won't have as good image quality with a super zoom as you would with a mirrorless camera with a nice lens for multiple reasons, such as glass quality, but namely the size and quality of the sensor. On the Nikon super zoom, you get a very small sensor that allows to have this further reach with something called crop factor that I won't get too much into, but basically the smaller the sensor is, the further the image will reach with similar size glass or lenses. Next is cost and simplicity. With these super zoom cameras, the cost will typically be a fraction of what you'd see for a mirrorless camera. The super zoom, you'll get the whole package in one, while the mirrorless, well, you'll need to buy the camera body with 1 or more lenses. That can be a plus or a negative. With the super zoom, you'll have 1 lens that reaches pretty much all the distances that you need, while the mirrorless, you'll have to interchange your lenses depending on the reach you need. So that becomes more expensive, but then again, that comes with the cost of image quality. Now getting into the learning curve, for the super zoom, you'll have less to consider and fewer settings to play around with compared to the mirrorless cameras. If you're prone to getting overwhelmed when learning something new, the super zoom might be for you. On the other hand, the mirrorless camera will leave you plenty of room to grow into, and I have to say, it's not because there's a lot of settings that you'll need to use all of them. You could very well put all of your settings on a mirrorless camera to automatic and progressively learn how to use everything. So in sum, what is most important in terms of gear is finding something that fits you and not the other way around. Find something that will make you want to come back to it rather than feeling overwhelmed and leaving the gear to collect dust. Now, don't forget to look into used gear. Most of what I own is used and I've never had any issues at all. Next, I want to cover the 3 main camera settings that are aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. First, let's start with the shutter speed. Like the name implies, this is the measurement of the speed at which a camera's shutter will open and close. The camera's shutter is kind of like a curtain that opens and closes in front of the camera's sensor, blocking or letting in the light to the sensor. Higher your shutter speed is, or faster it goes, the less light will reach the sensor. So the images would be darker if you don't change anything else. That also means that the lower shutter speed, or slower, the more the sensor is able to catch. If your shutter is low, you can start seeing motion blur. For example, if I keep the shutter open for a whole second and a bird flies by, Well, I'll just see a blur in the area the sensor caught the bird. The way I see it, a long shutter is kind of like taking a video for 1 second in this example, and putting all of the frames over each other. So if you want to freeze a moment, your video needs to be short or have fast shutter speed. For birds, depending on its size and speed, you'll be looking at a shutter speed of around 1/2000th of a second in order to freeze that movement of the wings and feathers. They are pretty fast. Next, let's explore aperture. The aperture is going to be in your lens rather than your camera. It's like a window inside of your lens that opens big or small to let in more or less light. The closest image I can think of to compare would be like squinting your eyes. The more you squint, or smaller aperture, the less light you'll get to your eyes. The sensor in this case. Now where it gets a bit confusing is the numbers. For aperture, we'll use the terms f and a number like 2.8, and we'll call a wide aperture the lowest number. For example, f1.2 would be considered a very wide aperture, whereas f11 would not. The smaller the number is, the wider the opening will be, and the more light will reach the sensor. Just to give you a why behind the numbers, f1.2, the 1.2 is not a measurement of size, it's a ratio. We take the length of the lens divided by the aperture to give us the size of the opening. So if we have a 120mm lens and the aperture is at 1.2, the opening of the aperture rings will be about 100mm. This is why the smaller ratio will give you the largest opening and most light. The widest aperture will also give you the most background blur and what we call bokeh, those nice soft rings we see in the background. At f1.2, the viewing depth, or what we call depth of field, will be much narrower than at f11, getting more things in focus, if you will. In wildlife photography, you'll want a wide aperture, a smaller number, to give a nice distinction between the subject and its background, but not small enough that only half of the face of the subject is in focus. Next, we have ISO. ISO measures how sensitive the sensor will be to the light. On film cameras, the ISO will be determined by the film itself that you use. The grain of the film will be more or less sensitive to light, depending on the one you use, ISO 100 versus ISO 800. Now, on digital cameras, it's really a digital setting that changes the sensitivity of the sensor to the light. If your ISO is too high, you'll start seeing grain in your images. But if it's too low, then your other two settings, aperture and shutter speed, will have to compensate to bring more light to the sensor. So as you can tell, it's all about getting the right balance of these three settings to get the right amount of light to the sensor. Bring down your shutter speed and you can lower your ISO, but get a higher aperture ratio and you'll need to bring down your shutter speed to compensate. But then you might get motion blur. So it's all about finding that right balance for the scene. Next section is quite important, autofocus. There's a few different types of autofocus on cameras, but for wildlife photography, we can eliminate single shot autofocus. What we want to be using is either the continuous autofocus or the tracking autofocus. So for continuous autofocus, or sometimes called AI servo, I think on Canon cameras, the autofocus keeps adjusting focus to the subject that's moving. It's not fixed on a single distance, but rather on a point on the subject and will follow that. Next, you'll want to shorten the area of the autofocus and set it to point focus or another small setting so that the autofocus is not looking for your subject everywhere in the frame. Now, it's important to know that the focus point does not need to be in the middle of your screen. It can be moved to any location on your frame. The next one we have is tracking autofocus. It can be super useful when trying to take photos of birds in flight. It will find your subject and attempt to follow it all across the screen. It's a lot like continuous autofocus, but super powered. For better results, you'll want to turn on your subject detection if you have it on your camera. When I'm taking photos of birds, I'll turn on the bird detection and it will set the focus to the eye of the bird. The same thing goes for the cat or dog one for any mammals. Now let's talk about how, where, and when to find the animals. The biggest trick I can give you for this is research what you're looking for. If you're looking for any birds, go outside anytime and you'll find some. Well, maybe at night will be a little bit more difficult, but you get the point. That said, the best time for birds in general would be early in the morning or later in the day. In the middle of the day, lots of birds are resting, plus the conditions of the light might be a bit difficult to work with, like harsh light. Use applications like eBird to find hotspots for birds, or even to help you locate specific birds that you'd be looking for. Now, when framing your subjects and taking your photo, try not to completely fill the frame with the animal you're photographing, unless that's the intentional look that you're going for. Try to capture what the animal is doing and where they are. Bring the viewer into the world of the animal and make them see something more than just the animal itself. Play with the light, get shots that are backlit, side lit, play with the shadows, and try to find something that is interesting. And again, not necessarily just the animal. There's a popular rule when it comes to placing your subjects in the frame, the rule of thirds. The rule goes that you should place your subjects anywhere along these lines to give a pleasing look to your photos. Try to divide them like what you see here on screen. Try to leave space in front of the animal. It will give a sense of space, like the image is breathing, leading us to something. Try to get some clean backgrounds that are free of too many distractions like branches. You can also use these distractions in your favor, like a branch in front of an animal can become a leading line that points to the subject. Next, I want to cover ethics quickly. Listen, we all want the most special photos and try to get close to an animal as much as possible, but remember one thing. The subject is always more important than the shot itself. Please don't bait animals into going into certain locations or to feed them. They can lose their natural behaviors and lead to their demise over time. Especially in winter and migration periods, do not harass birds and try to make them fly away. Their energy is very scarce, and flying away when it's not necessary can lead them to not making their journey back home. Stay on trails when possible and avoid going on private property. It gives us a bad name and leads to certain areas just getting closed off to the public. Learn to recognize when an animal is stressed. If it's staring back at you and not moving, well, maybe back off a bit. It might not be happy with your presence. If an owl is staring at you with big eyes, that's a sign that it's not too comfortable. If that same owl is just glancing at you and has small eyes, you might be fine. It's just acknowledging your presence. When near a nest though, be extra careful. Some birds could attack. Wildlife photography can be hard, but it really doesn't need to be complicated. The two most important things with wildlife photography is to find pleasure in it and keep the animal's well-being in mind. Now, you've just seen the basics that will get you started in wildlife photography, but this is really just the beginning of what I want to share with you. If this video helped you in any way at all, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future tutorials, field sessions, or even behind the scenes content. If you want to go a step further in helping the channel out, consider becoming a member. Members get extra perks like getting early access to videos, a closer way to ask me your questions, and the ability to have one-on-one calls with me to talk about photography and/or wildlife. So if you're serious about growing as a wildlife photographer or just looking to start opening your horizons to it, hit that subscribe button and check the membership options below. I'd love you as part of the community. Now, hope you enjoyed the video today. Take care, and I'll see you again very soon.